The precipice was a hell of a place for a pop quiz. Damian Cole had the girl on his left and the girl on his right, and he wanted me to pick one. I picked neither. I signaled the sharpshooter, who put an arrow clean through Damian's heart. He, the heroine, and her sidekick all went over the edge in a tangle of limbs and surprise screams. Before I could even work up a convincing look of grief, the heroine flew back up, dragging the sidekick with her, and planted a boot square in my chest. I counted the pebbles scattering over the cliff edge as I tried to get my bearings, confirming for the 108th time that this was not how the story was supposed to go. 3 days ago, this body had stopped being entirely my own. It was happening again now. My right hand was trembling against my will. Choose one. Damian's voice echoed in my memory, his sword blade tracing the flawless necks of the two women. The other one dies. Ava Monroe, the one on his left, had been grinding her heel into my toes. I'd stared at the intricate embroidery on her slippers, my mind flashing back to the original text. To provoke the heroine, the dashing but doomed Julian Thorne chooses her rival, causing the spurned heroine to be cast from the cliff, tragically miscarrying their child. And me? 3 months from now, the hero was scheduled to chop off my head and leave it decorating the castle gates like a forgotten Halloween pumpkin. A sharp pain in my foot brought me back. Ava's almond eyes were wide. Julian, what are you spacing out for? The rope binding her waist was loosening. She was working the knot. Of course she was. Damian had suddenly pressed his blade to my throat. You have 10 seconds. The mountain wind whipped sand against my face. I kept my eyes fixed on the scrub brush 30 yards behind him, where the Northlands marksman I'd hired was waiting. 10, 9, 8. Ava stopped grinding her heel. I saw the glint of a silver needle sliding from her sleeve. 3, 2, take the shot. The bowstrings sang, scattering a flock of crows. As the blood bloomed on Damian's chest, his shocked eyes met mine. 2 bodies tumbled into the abyss with a shower of loose rock. I scrambled to the edge just in time to see Ava Monroe soaring upwards, holding the psychic by the collar. The golden butterflies on her skirt brushed past my nose, carrying the distinct, out-of-place scent of Texas barbecue sauce. Julian, you son of a bitch. Her kick sent me sprawling, my head cracking against the flagstones. Ava stood over me, whipping a length of severed rope. Do you have any idea what happens when the plot deviation score exceeds 20%? The whole system could crash. The sidekick, Chloe Vance, dusted herself off and, to my astonishment, pulled out a vintage, souped-up calculator. The cliff scene just jumped the queue by 30 chapters, she muttered, her fingers flying across the keys. We'll have to recalculate the hero's angst progression. I stared at the translucent text boxes hovering over their heads. Traveler, Ava Monroe, ID 9527. Traveler, Chloe Vance, error code 404. Ava's slipper pinned my wrist to the ground as she shoved a glowing crystal amulet in my face. Agency Inspector, Grade 3. I'm initiating a full memory wipe. Chloe grabbed her arm. Wait. He looked at me. For times. Ava paused. Every time you fiddled with the knot, his gaze shifted exactly 15 degrees to the left. The wind swirled dead, leaves between us. Ava's silver needle froze an inch from my forehead. You can see the system prompts? I looked at the pearl hairpin shaking in her hair. Ever since you messed with the chicken soup last month. The poison that was supposed to have caused the tragic miscarriage had, I now realized, been swapped out for honey lemon cough syrup. Chloe suddenly tore open her tunic, revealing a torso wrapped in bandages. This is my 3rd time being coded as the sidekick. The first 2 times, the hero had me drawn and quartered. She ripped away a bandage, revealing skin covered in faint, glowing golden glyphs. Every time I die, I get one of these marks. Ava's amulet beeped frantically. A roar echoed from the bottom of the ravine. No time, she said, looping the rope around my neck. You're either with us, or I'm sending you to meet your maker right now. A thick fog rose from the chasm, and a dark shape could be seen scrabbling up the rock face. Chloe threw her calculator at me. He's reanimating. Damian's twisted limbs clawed their way over the edge, his eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. Ava's needle grazed my ear. Sign the contract, or he rips you to shreds. I grabbed the jade bracelet on her wrist. Deal. Just as Damian's fingernails were about to pierce my throat, Ava slammed her amulet onto his forehead. Golden glyphs spread from the crystal across his body. Chloe pulled out a flint and steel. Close your eyes. In a blinding flash of light, I heard Ava curse. A system revenant in a beginner-level world? The agency is screwing me over. Below us, Damien's body twitched. In front of me, Ava was trussing me up like a Thanksgiving turkey. Can you see this now? She asked, a point of golden light forming on her fingertip. I stared at the semi-transparent panel flickering beside her head. Plot deviation, 19%. Chloe suddenly ripped my shirt open and drew a bizarre symbol over my heart with a crimson pen. The correction is coming. Brace for blowback. No sooner had she spoken than the flagstones at the cliff's edge began to crack, oozing a thick, amber-colored syrup. Ava threw 3 copper coins that embedded themselves in the ground. It's the Chapter 28 romance scene. The Sweet Confessions over Spun Sugar chapter. The moment the syrup touched our boots, she yanked me up into a crooked pine tree. The beads on Chloe's calculator clattered to the ground. In the book, this is where the heroine makes candy for the hero. So the correction is forcing a romance arc. Ava sliced her palm and pressed it against the tree trunk. The instant her blood hit the syrup, the entire cliff began to melt. Hold on. As the pine tree toppled over, sending us sliding toward a swirling vortex of syrup, Damien's body suddenly swelled to 10 times its size. His rotting hand smashed through the cliff face, and vine-like veins sprouted from his empty eye sockets. The weak point is his solar plexus. Chloe yelled, throwing a red cord that wrapped around my waist. Ava's needle pricked the soft flesh between my thumb and forefinger. Use your blood to draw him in. The moment I slipped my wrist, Damien let out a bestial roar. His body crashed through a wave of syrup, his fangs inches from my throat. Ava suddenly whipped out a cast-iron fondue pot and slammed it on his head. Sizzling oil poured over the revenant, and the rising smoke smelled vaguely of cayenne pepper. Recite the banishment protocol. Now, she yelled, kicking away a grasping vein. I stared at the expiration date stamped on the fondue packaging. This stuff is 2 years out of date. Relics don't have a shelf life. Chloe shouted, propping her calculator on her shoulder like a crossbow. Damien's body twisted like a pretzel in the hot oil. Ava seized the opportunity and threw her amulet. By the laws of narrative and code. As the amulet exploded in a flash of gold, I saw torn pages of a book scattering in the air. One page, stuck to the syrup, clearly read. The Baron's Caged Dove, Chapter 72. Chloe screamed. The glyphs on her wrist were bleeding. The correction is syncing with the original text. Ava grabbed us and pulled us into a sewer grate that had suddenly appeared. Behind us, the syrup solidified into 2 glowing words, to be continued. The damp brick walls of the tunnel were plastered with pages from the agency rulebook. Rule 3 was weeping tears of blood. Maximum 20% deviation per story cycle, Ava said, lighting a strange horn lantern. Chloe smoothed out a damp, torn page. I died at the hero's hand both times before. On the yellowed paper, her own frantic annotations were scrawled. First run, tried to elope with heroine. Struck by system lightning. Second run, poisoned side character. Killed by 1,000 arrows. The glyphs below her collarbone began to glow, projecting a star chart onto the ceiling. Those are punishment marks, Ava said, pricking my fingertip with her needle. You're about to get yours. A bead of my blood floated in the air, forming a holographic image of my own head, mounted on the castle gates. But you can see the correction values now, she said, moving closer. What happened? I looked at the swaying pearls in her hair, and the memory of that snowy night came rushing back. 3 months ago, returning from a border skirmish, I was supposed to drink a cup of poison wine from the heroine's hand. But when Ava had approached with the goblet, a text box had appeared in my vision. Nightshade concentrate. Fatal within 3 hours. From that day on, I said, tracing the rim of the phantom cup, I could see the death warnings. Chloe's calculator suddenly fell apart. It's a ward. From the first traveler. She pointed to tiny script on the back of the torn page. When a native awakens, the sacred fire shall burn away the correction. The cellar began to shake. Syrup seeped through the bricks. Ava threw a silk rope that snagged a ceiling beam. To the river. We burst through a hidden door into an alley, but Damien's corpse was blocking the way. The arrow I had ordered fired was still lodged in his decaying chest. The weak point shifted, Chloe yelled, tearing open my tunic. The symbol over my heart had grown into a chain, pointing directly at the Revenant's core. Ava's needles flew like a silver storm, hit his solar plexus. I snatched the hairpin from her hair and plunged it into the Revenant's chest just as the syrup surged, engulfing us. Damien's body dissolved into ink, and bloody words formed in the air. Plotline calibration initiated. After scrubbing off a gallon of syrup and changing clothes, I was lying on a plush sofa in a private room at the Gilded Lily. The correction is force-loading the next scene, Chloe said, prying open a floorboard. We have to stall it with some improv. The secret compartment was filled with cotton dolls, syrup-filled blood packs, and a silk gown embroidered with the words "A Tragic Affair." Props left by the previous travelers, she said, shaking out a yellowed script. Follow this, and we might fool the correction. I picked up a cotton doll labeled Heroine. Tucked into its stuffing was a pawn ticket that read value: 2 bits. You really think this thing is going to inspire the hero's undying devotion? Ava was stuffing a blood pack into her cheek. It's better than getting smote by lightning. Just as the city watch struck the hour, we heard footsteps on the roof tiles. He's here. Chloe pulled a rope, and white silk curtains dropped from the ceiling. I gripped a prop sword and charged the cotton doll. Stabbed third rib on the left. Ava hissed. The moment my sword hit the doll, it exploded in a cloud of cotton stuffing. Where blood should have sprayed, a faded menu fluttered out. Roast boar, 8 coppers. The stained glass window shattered, and the hero, Ethan Lancaster, burst in. Ava. Ava bit down on her packet of rainbow-colored syrup, spraying a stream of red, orange, and green goo all over his face. Julian has done this to me. She wailed, clutching a non-existent baby bump as she staggered backward. Ethan's black leather tunic was dripping with syrup. His line was supposed to be a cry of anguish, but instead he sputtered, "What is this sticky crap?" Behind a screen, Chloe was frantically ringing a small bell, signaling me to get on with it. Steeling myself, I grabbed Ava's throat. You have only yourself to blame for loving a man you shouldn't have. Cut. Ethan pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his face. That's not the line. In the book, you're supposed to say, "You are nothing but a plaything to me." The three of us froze as he pulled out a heavily annotated copy of the Baron's Cage Dove. Chapter 72, 3rd paragraph, he said, tracing the page with a finger. At this point, the male antagonist is supposed to rip the heroine's bodice. Syrup began to ooze from the floorboards, forming the words "plot deviation." Ava kicked the cotton doll across the room. Plan B. Chloe yanked a red cord, and the entire floor collapsed. As we tumbled into a hidden cellar, we heard Ethan's roar from above. "How dare you try to fool me with cheap corn syrup?" Ava lit a torch, illuminating walls covered in the logs of past travelers. "He wasn't self-aware 3 months ago," she said, touching a set of scratch marks on the wall. "Another traveler is interfering with the hero." My foot hit something hard. I picked it up. It was a broken piece of a crystal amulet. The engraving was still visible. Agency employee, ID 1314. Chloe suddenly clapped her hands over her ears. The correction is mimicking a thunderstorm. A low rumbling came from above, and syrup began to drip through the brick ceiling. Ava laid out her needles in a defensive pattern. "Change of plans. We're jumping ahead to the wedding night scene." As they shoved me into a groom's ceremonial tunic, I caught my reflection in a shard of mirror. A text box hovered over my head. Deviation score, 19.8%. After the vows, you vomit blood. Ava instructed, shoving a vial into my sleeve. "Make sure you spill it on the ceremonial goblets." The moment the wedding candles were lit, the cellar transformed into a bridal chamber. Just as Ethan kicked down the door, sword in hand, I tackled Ava onto the bed. "You may have my body, but you'll never have my heart," she shrieked, squeezing a blood pack from her sleeve. This time, it was filled with chocolate pudding, which splattered all over Ethan's perfectly coiffed hair. "Do you take me for a fool?" he roared, his sword cleaving the altar in two. Chloe suddenly scrambled out from under the bed, holding her calculator aloft. I now pronounce you man and, plot device. Ceremony complete. Red silk ribbons, formed from the correction, suddenly wrapped around Ethan, dragging him out of the room. Ava collapsed in the wreckage. Deviations down to 18%. She suddenly stared at the broken amulet in my hand. That belonged to the observer who went missing 3 years ago. In the candlelight, shimmering patterns appeared on the crystal, forming 2 words, beware the before fading. The sound of a lute drifted from the roof. Someone was singing a mournful ballad. The correction is generating a new NPC, Chloe said, smearing chicken blood on her calculator. We have to destroy this place. We smashed through the back wall, just as the entire Gilded Lily was melting into a giant candy house. Featherlight pages began to drift down from the night sky. Ava snatched one out of the air. An official warning from the agency, she said, her eyes widening. They know. The paper burst into flames. The ashes reformed into a new script. In 3 days, the male antagonist will marry the heroine to save her honor. I stared at the wedding invitation, crushing a piece of saltpeter into an empty rouge pot. Wrong ratio of sulfur, Chloe said, 2 beads flying off her calculator. It's 1 part saltpeter, 2 parts sulfur, 3 parts charcoal. Ava was shredding firecrackers into a pile of red paper. The book says there have to be 900 firecrackers at the wedding. She leaned in and sniffed my collar. Why do you smell like gunpowder? I silently pressed my hand against the Traveler's Emergency Handbook tucked in my sleeve, its pages filled with diagrams for homemade explosives. The correction is forcing the wedding for tomorrow night, Chloe said, pouring sulfur into a cake mold. We have to blast our way out. Outside, fine threads of sugar rained down, turning the cobblestone street the color of rock candy. We'll use fireworks to disrupt the plotline, I said, packing my mixture into a bamboo tube. During the ceremony, we blow a hole in the chapel roof. Ava snatched the tube from me. Do you even know the proper mix for black powder? She asked, just as I was adding incense ash into the pot, thinking it was charcoal. The explosion came faster than the wedding bells. The shockwave threw me into a chicken coop. A cloud of rainbow-colored smoke billowed overhead. Chloe's calculator was embedded in a nearby oak tree, and one of Ava's slippers dangled from a lantern. Julian, she leaped down from a roof beam, her silver needles glinting. Did you make a smoke bomb? I wiped a smear of blue powder from my face. At least the colors are festive. A flock of magpies made a solidified syrup flew into the smoke and instantly emerged as rainbow-colored parrots. The correction began to repair the collapsed chapel, but the bricks and tiles kept arranging themselves into the word wedding. Deviation is at 19.9%. Chloe shouted, pointing at the flashing numbers in the air. Ava grabbed the smoldering pot. This smoke, it's corroding the correction. We watched as the rainbow cloud consumed the syrup, and a 10-foot-deep fissure opened in the ground. At the bottom lay a broken stone tablet, its inscription glowing with a phosphorescent light. Tomb of the Princess Annabelle. A secret passage into the old royal catacombs. Chloe's compass needle spun wildly. A traveler's safe house. As she jumped into the fissure, I saw a skeleton curled up behind the tablet. A jade bracelet was clasped around its wrist, engraved with the words, Agency ID 1314. Ava clutched her chest. My inspector's mark. It's burning. The phosphorescent light on the epitaph shifted, forming new words. 7th modification attempt failed. Survival rate, 0%. The syrup of the correction flowed to the edge of the fissure, but recoiled from the smoke. There's horn ash in the smoke, I said, picking up the shattered incense burner. It repels it. Chloe suddenly tore away the skeleton's rotted clothes, revealing a blackened ribcage. Death by fire, she murmured, pointing toward a crack in the tomb wall. There are more bodies inside. As we entered the passage, holding the smoking bamboo tubes, Ava's amulet began to shriek. Survival rate data updated, she said, staring at the glowing red text. Current, 0.7%. The tomb walls were covered in layers upon layers of carvings. First modification, attempted to give hero a romance brain. Failure. 4th modification, added warrior goddess system to heroine. Violation of code. I ran my hand over the most recent carving. 7th, Native Awakening Project, The beads on Chloe's calculator suddenly levitated, forming an arrow that pointed deeper into the tomb, toward a bronze sarcophagus. The moment the lid slid open, a tidal wave of syrup crashed into the tomb. Close your eyes. In a flash of light, I grabbed a scroll from inside the sarcophagus and heard Ava scream. When I opened my eyes again, we were kneeling in a brightly lit chapel, decorated for a wedding. Ethan's sword point was at my chest, pinning the scroll from the tomb against my wedding tunic. "What a unique wedding gift, my dear," he sneered, his blade tracing the title on the yellowed parchment, a treatise on advanced firearms. Overhead, a blood-red progress bar formed from the correction. Deviation score, 19.99%. I was soaking in a bathtub filled with 3 pounds of jasmine petals, rereading the firearms manual. The star courtesan of the House of Blossoms has to be proficient in 7 instruments, Chloe said, applying a fake scar to my chest. Ethan is scheduled to buy your freedom at dusk. Ava was stuffing gunpowder into a lute. In the original story, he plays the hero and saves the damsel in distress. Our job is to make sure the damsel dies an early, explosive death. She pried my jaw open. Memorize your character sheet. Your name is Lily. You're the orphaned daughter of a general, sold into servitude. The bronze mirror reflected my face, adorned with jewels and pearls. The correction had helpfully watermarked my temple. Beauty score, 61. The minimum score for a star courtesan is 85, Chloe sighed, tucking her calculator into the folds of my dress. If things go south, hit the clients with this. When the evening drums sounded, I was pushed in the main hall, a place thick with the scent of perfume and desperation. Presenting our newest talent, the lovely songbird. The madam's handkerchief flicked against my face. Someone in the crowd threw a nutshell. This girl's got the eyes of a butcher haggling over the price of pork. From a balcony above, Ava began furiously strumming a zither to cover the noise. Flutter your eyelashes, you idiot. I tried to twitch my right eye, which only caused someone to shout, "She's having a seizure." Ribbons of red silk, formed from the correction, suddenly wrapped around the rafters, yanking my sleeves into a dramatic pose. More music, more dancing, a bouncer yelled, banging a gong. On my 7th force pirouette, I finally spotted Ethan in a corner, dressed in black. He was idly flipping through the firearms manual, his finger tapping the page titled Thunderclap Mines. "Fall now," Chloe yelled, using her calculator to ricochet a bead that extinguished a candle. I tore the silk ribbons and plummeted, only to be caught by Ethan, who used his sheathed sword to break my fall. "Such grace," he said, his sword tip flicking away my veil. "You spent 10 years on horseback, haven't you?" Ava's zither suddenly exploded. In a shower of wood splinters, the gunpowder hidden in my sleeve trickled out. Ethan caught some of the fine black powder on his fingertip and sniffed it. "The saltpeter ratio is off. You need more sulfur." The correction began to manifest a torrential downpour outside, but did nothing to cool the sweat on my back. "Your Highness jests," I said, my voice a high-pitched, unconvincing warble. "It's merely a rare perfume from the West." He suddenly pulled me close, his nose an inch from my throat. "Playing dress-up is an interesting hobby for a military commander, Thorn." Chloe's calculator beads knocked over a wine goblet. The spilled wine formed an arrow on the floor, pointing to the exit. "You must have me confused with someone else." I flung my sleeve out, snagging a pillar. Ava's broken lute suddenly began blaring a raucous, celebratory tune. The corrections rainstorm turned into a shower of red envelopes. Ethan caught one. It was empty. "Is my wedding gift list not yet complete?" he asked, holding up the firearms manual. I used the cover of the falling red paper to crash through a window, only to find the entire street being reshaped by the syrup. The sign for the House of Blossoms melted and reformed into 3 words: the gentleman's repose. Ava pulled me into a sewer drain. The correction is scrambling the plot lines. As filthy water soaked my dress, my hand brushed against carved markings on the drainpipe floor. A phosphorescent glow lit up, revealing rows of tiny words. Observer's log. The agency is eliminating awakened natives. Chloe let out a muffled groan. The glyphs on her wrist were weeping black blood. Survival rate is down to 0.5%. Ava said, the crystal of her amulet cracking. From the end of the drain, we heard the sound of a flute playing a melancholy tune. When we climbed out, the entire building had been transformed into a giant piece of wedding candy. Ethan stood in the middle of it all, sprinkling gunpowder in the shape of a celebratory symbol. After the vows, it is time for the ceremonial wine. The nightshade vial in his palm was identical to the one I had avoided 3 months ago. My hand trembled as I held the goblet. The poison on the rim seemed to coalesce into the shape of a tiny snake. Drink this, and all past grievances are forgotten, Ethan said, pressing the point of his sword to Ava's throat. Chloe suddenly flipped the wedding altar. The beads of her calculator exploded, releasing a cloud of sulfurous smoke. Hold your breath. As I was yanked through a secret door, I heard the sound of shattering porcelain. Damien's voice, thick and sludgy, rose from the chaos. Fancy meeting you all here. His rotten left arm had been replaced by a bronze prosthesis, a black agency key card embedded in the joint. Head of the plot restoration team, ID 000, he said, his metal arm pointing at my chest. Your survival rate has just hit 0. Ava suddenly blew on a bone whistle. The sound it made was that same impossibly cheerful tune from before. The correction syrup began to boil, and Damien's bronze arm started to smoke. A sonic attack, Chloe shouted, ripping off a piece of her skirt to stuff in my ears. That's a forbidden art of the first travelers. The moment Ethan smashed through the wall, I snatched the whistle and blew. As I puffed out a horribly off-key melody, a bronze sarcophagus crashed down from the ceiling. The lid flew open, and Damien's prosthesis was yanked off, flying toward the corpse inside. That's my original body, he shrieked, phosphorescent fire igniting in his eye sockets. You found the observer's tomb? Ava's needles formed a complex trigram in the air. So you're the road cleaner who went native. The fire illuminated an inscription inside the coffin. Agency Cleanup Division, 000. Condemned to eternal redaction. The correction suddenly materialized as a swarm of spectral brooms that began to beat us senseless. Careful of materialized system tools. Chloe yelled, breaking her calculator apart to form a shield. Damien's head spun a full 360 degrees. The plot line must be restored. As syrup chains shot from his chest, I blew the highest, most piercing note of a song called Phoenix Fanfare. The bone whistle shattered, and the wedding hall instantly transformed into a funeral parlor. Ethan's wedding clothes turned to mourning robes. The firearms manual in his hands burst into flame. Survival rate is climbing. Ava's amulet now showed 0.1%. Damien's bronze arm suddenly flew back and clamped around his own throat. What did you do to the code? Chloe's compass needle spun wildly, pointing to a mural on the wall behind me. The faded painting of celestial beings was rearranging itself into the image of a modern office conference room. That's the agency's control center. Ava's needles hovered in front of the mural. Damien fell to his knees, screaming, as his bronze body cracked. From the fissures, paper ash floated out, forming cartoonish, chibi-style versions of the three of us. He's uploading our data. I grabbed Chloe's makeshift shield and threw it at the mural. The beads embedded themselves in a painted lute, and Damien's body exploded. I was in a print shop, carving wooden type blocks, while Chloe was circling sections of the original novel with a red pen. This scene where he jumps into the moat has to be changed to him digging a fish pond. The ink she flicked from her pen turned into fireflies that spelled out happy ending. Ava poured chili oil into the ink pot. The correction is starting to seep into the ink itself. In the acrid fumes, a tentacle made of syrup recoiled and dissolved. We raided a bookstore that night, under a moon that looked like a cured egg yolk. The altered copies go on the third shelf from the east, I whispered, sliding a copy of the Commander's Guide to Profitable Farming onto the shelf. The pages immediately began to ooze syrup, forming a plot deviation warning. Chloe's calculator shield smashed the syrup tentacle. Survival rate is up to 3.7%. 3 days later, every storyteller in the city's market square began to inexplicably choke on their words. And so Commander Thorne met his bloody end at the wedding. Wait, what's this about him composting? A storyteller's gavel hit the altered copy, and a diagram of a pitchfork appeared in the air. Ava, cracking pumpkin seeds in the crowd, muttered, "That's the 23rd storyteller to glitch today." The candy sculpture I was eating suddenly twisted, its sweetness replaced by a barcode-like warning. Deviation, 39%. New chapbook. Get a new chapbook. 99 ways for a side character to live. Chloe hawked at a street corner. As the crowd surged forward, every lantern in the street turned a sickly green. A rain of correction syrup began to fall, but couldn't extinguish the bonfires people were starting with the original, boring books. A baker stared at the new chapbook, his eyes wide. The side character and the villain become blood brothers? Back to the dye works, Ava yelled, pulling me into an alley filled with vats of indigo dye. The surface of the water reflected an image of the wooden type blocks rearranging themselves. Male antagonist forcibly marries male hero. Chloe grabbed a bolt of white silk and bit her thumb. We have to overwrite the program with a blood seal. The moment her blood touched the silk, the dye vats boiled over, and an octopus-like monster made of syrup erupted from the water. Smash the core, Ava yelled, throwing me a heavy laundry mallet. Inside the monster's translucent belly, the wooden type blocks were forming the hero's grand wedding chapter. I smashed the character 4 Heartbreak, and Chloe's blood-soaked silk banner whipped in the wind. Survival rate, 5%. A holographic warning descended from a crack in the sky. Illegal tampering detected. System wipe in T-minus 12 hours. A tornado of fire smashed through the south wall, and the survival rate jumped to 10%. It was Ethan. The wedding invitation in his hand had been syruped over to read. An oath of brotherhood, to rule the kingdom together. "What have you done to the royal decree?" he roared, sparks from his sword hissing in the dye vats. I held up our finished, rewritten chapbook. "According to this, you're now my brother from another mother." A blue mist exploded from the vats. All at once, every citizen in the city began to chant like puppets on a string. Though not born of the same year, month, or day, we pledged to farm 100 acres side by side. I was hunched over the stove, shaping my 18th meat bun, while Ava brutalized a lime with a meat tenderizer. "The smiley face needs to look more pathetic," she said, stuffing a bitter powder into the dough. "It has to represent the shattered heart of a devoted follower." Chloe was carving a crying cat face into a steamer basket. "Ethan is coming at dawn to collect the brotherly tax." I stared at the sign over our new shop, the Brothers Griddle. I remembered last night when he'd had me in a headlock, demanding I turn over the garrison's payroll. "What if he throws up?" I asked, shaping a bun to look like something the dog left on the lawn. Ava held up a bowl of hot and sour soup. "It's better than being beheaded." Before the morning mist had cleared, Ethan's royal guard had surrounded our little shop. "Where's my tribute, little brother?" he asked, flicking open a steamer basket with the tip of his sword. I presented him with the heartbroken follower bun. Its doughy face was cracked, revealing a nauseating green filling. The moment Ethan took a bite, Chloe's calculator began to tick. Blech! The first mouthful sprayed all over his captain's armor. "What is this?" he choked, gulping down half a flask of water. I held out a cup of the brutalized lime juice. A palate cleanser. The instant he drained the cup, Ava accidentally kicked over a vat of chili oil. A deep flush spread from Ethan's ears to his neck, and a vein pulsed in his forehead. Very good," he coughed, leaning against a post. "Give me the recipe." Chloe grabbed my sleeve. Survival rate just hit 15%. Ethan suddenly snatched the entire steamer. Such a delicacy must be presented to my father, the king. We watched, dumbfounded, as he packed a basket, gagging intermittently while his captain dutifully held a basin. "A classic case of Stockholm Syndrome," Chloe noted in her ledger. I took the opportunity to swap out a laxative powder for powdered sugar. "You should try the Sweetheart Bond, too." As Ethan bit into the pink-colored dough, a strange, distant look came over his face. The royal chef. Someone used to make pastries like this. A scar on his wrist, one I'd never seen before, began to bleed, staining the rabbit-shaped bun red. Ava's needle froze mid-air. "That scar isn't in the original text." Ethan suddenly grabbed my shoulders. "Have you seen the words, too?" He tore open his tunic. Faintly, over his heart, was a faded brand of the words, Male Lead One. It appeared 3 years ago at the Royal Selection Ball, he said, kicking over table. It's like a curse. The beads from Chloe's calculator bounced into a soup pot. Survival rate just breached 20%. Ethan clutched his head and roared, his iron helmet falling into the hearth. Every time I'm in a scene, I hear a voice in my head, feeding me lines. The spilled chili oil on the floor formed an arrow, pointing toward the royal palace. It's the corrections corps, Ava said, lighting a piece of horn incense. It's in the ancestral temple. As the survival rate hit 25%, the horns of the city guard blared through the streets. Protect the prince, his captain suddenly yelled, chopping down our shop's banner. Assassins are attacking his highness. We stared as Ethan proceeded to hold his own sword to his throat. Quickly, he hissed, "Take me hostage." "You're overacting," I said, stuffing a bitter bun in his mouth. He chewed on the foul-tasting filling, his eyes watering. "Take me to the temple," he whispered. "I am done being a puppet." I crashed through an antique shelf, and a copy of the original text maintenance manual rolled out of a porcelain vase. "The correction has materialized," Ava yelled, pinning the book to the wall with her needles. An old monk with a broom burst through the window, his robes embroidered with 404 error codes. "Heresy must be purged," he intoned. A sweep of his broom sent out a shock wave of force, shattering a bookshelf into the words "T.O. be continued." Chloe's calculator beads embedded themselves in the wall. To the secret passage. As we tumbled into a hidden compartment, the monk's broom suddenly morphed into a spear. That's the hero's weapon from Chapter 48. I ducked as the spear tip whistled past my ear. The walls of the passage began to ooze syrup, forming a sign, "Gallery of Classic Scenes." "These are recordings of past travelers," Ava said, touching a glowing mural. The image showed a woman in a green dress tampering with a vial of nightshade. "That was my first run," Chloe gasped. The woman in the mural swapped the poison for a laxative, only to be struck by a bolt of system lightning while sitting on the toilet. A caption appeared in a shower of pixelated filth. Deviation, 21%. The next mural showed a man dressed as a scholar, trying to teach the heroine calculus. "The first traveler, Lucas Vance," Ava whispered, her fingers trembling. "The missing observer." The scholar in the image was transformed by the correction into a pig-headed monster, his test papers turning into a judgment, unfit for narrative. The monk's broom smashed through the wall, and we fell into the most gruesome mural yet. "Don't look," Ava cried, trying to cover my eyes with her needles. But I could feel the sticky, dried blood ink on my fingers. Chloe read the inscription in a choked voice, attempted to castrate the male lead. "Sentenced to death by 1,000 cuts." The monk's sandals pressed down on my back. "Return to the proper path." I threw a handful of chili powder in his face. His robes unfurled into a giant net of glowing 404s. "Use this," Chloe yelled, tossing me the horn lantern. Its light revealed hidden layers in the murals, the blood-written messages of past travelers, overlapping to form a hidden map. Ava suddenly slammed her fist into the mural of Lucas. "There's a hidden chamber here." We tumbled through the false wall as the monk's roars faded into a monotonous chant. "It's the first traveler's safe house," she said, running her hand over the scratch marks on the wall. Chloe lit all the candles, revealing a room filled with floating crimson talismans. At the center was an iron box inscribed with the words, "To those who follow, Lucas Vance." Inside, a sheepskin scroll was covered in writing of dried blood. "The agency is farming the correction force." Ava suddenly coughed up a mouthful of black blood. A 404 symbol, identical to the ones on the monk's robes, was glowing on her palm. He planted a tracking curse on me. A self-destruct mechanism in the iron box activated, burning the scroll to ash. Only a single charred corner remained, with the words, "Find the original off." The monk smashed through the door, and Chloe tore down all the talismans. Deeper into the gallery, we fell into a new mural. In it, Ava was brewing tea in early spring. It was the opening scene of the book, the moment she was supposed to poison the tea. "So you were changing the plot from your very first run." She gave a bitter laugh as a vortex pulled her in. A little late to be talking about that now, isn't it? I was shivering in a bathtub when Chloe suddenly smashed a teacup. I pieced together the blood scroll fragments, she said, holding up a torn piece of sheepskin. The last words are find the original author. The ceiling exploded, and the syrupy roof came crashing down. Ava pulled me into a hidden passage. The correction is tearing the place apart. The stone steps were slick with moss. The beads from Chloe's calculator hit the wall and rang like a temple bell. There's an ice cellar below, she said, stopping short. I smell pine soot ink. The cold mist cleared to reveal a massive wall of ice. Frozen in it was an image, a young woman with black-framed glasses, typing at a computer. On the screen were the words, "The Baron's Cage Dove." "That's me," Chloe whispered in shock. I'm the author." Frozen in the ice was the original manuscript, covered in angry red annotations. Add a graphic torture scene for the side character in Chapter 72. Make it bloody. I never wrote that. Chloe tore open her collar. The glyphs on her collarbone burned like a brand. I glanced at my reflection in the ice. A strange script had appeared on the back of my neck. Heir to Lucas Vance. Ava's needle was at my throat. You knew you were the first observer's successor. 3 months ago, after I survived the poison, a man began appearing in my dreams. The ice wall shattered. From the shards, a half-burned, yellowed paper emerged. Chloe's hand shook as she unrolled the rejected draft. This was my senior thesis. The publisher rejected it. A vicious red comment was scrawled at the end. Romance arc is weak. Reformat for dark romance channel. They butchered my manuscript. She coughed up a spray of black blood. The droplets hit the ice, melting it to reveal smaller, hidden text. Creator, Chloe Vance. Permanently bound to the correction system. Ava kicked over an ice pedestal. So you're the source of all this? The publisher forced me into a rewrite contract. Chloe ripped open her shirt. A lock-shaped brand over her heart resonated with a mark on my neck, and the entire ice cellar began to collapse. Damien's bronze arm smashed through the wall, eliminating the traitor. Chloe bit her fingertip, and a mist of her blood formed into a writer's brush. By the authority of the original author. The moment she wrote the words "the end," Damien's joints locked up like rusted metal. Into the ice coffin. As the explosion ripped the roof off, a shimmering afterimage of Lucas Vance rose from the coffin. My mind flooded with a torrent of memories. Lucas burying an amulet in the temple. Chloe crying as she rewrote her novel. Ava swapping the poison. Survival rate, 75%. Chloe's hairpin shattered into dust. Huddled in the ice coffin, we watched our separate pasts braid together into a single, tangled story. The midnight bell had just struck for the 3rd time. My hand was slick with sweat as I gripped the brass trumpet. Ava hammered her silver needles into the eaves of the palace roof according to a complex diagram. The southeast position needs 3 more needles. The puppet army will break through the eastern gate. Chloe knelt by a dragon-headed gargoyle on the main hall's roof, wedging the beads of her calculator into the cracks between the tiles. The celestial alignments are in conflict. There will be blood within minutes. As if on cue, the eastern gate exploded. Damien, mounted on a horse coated in syrup, charged in. His bronze arm was tangled with puppet strings, and behind him, an army of gray, syrupy puppets surged up the marble steps. I've had enough of being a marionette. Ethan Lancaster roared, his sword slicing through the puppet strings tangled on the watchtower. Amber syrup oozed from the cuts. Light the oil. I blasted a war anthem on the trumpet, and the bronze bells on the eaves began to ring. 10 golden gargoyles spewed fire, incinerating the puppet strings and revealing the syrupy cores of the soldiers. There's a breach in the north, Ava yelled, throwing a needle that drew a bolt of lightning from the sky. It struck the ground 7 feet in front of Damien's horse. Chloe, update the forecast. Chloe bit her finger, flicking a drop of blood onto her calculator. The beads exploded into a bloody hexagram, and a glowing red number appeared on the stone tiles. 83%. A dog from the agency dares to use the sacred arts? Damien sliced his own palm, the blood mist forming the ghostly image of a crystal amulet. I am the bearer of the eternal seal. Ethan drew his bow, and an arrow tore through the phantom amulet. Lucas Vance should have scattered your ashes to the wind when he had the chance. Fragments of the amulet reflected a memory. Lucas breaking a fish-shaped pendant in two, burying one half in the temple foundation and tying the other around my neck. The secret techniques I'd been learning in my dreams were all from this inherited memory. So I'm the key. I touched the warm pendant as I saw Chloe suddenly slice her own wrist. That contract should have been burned to ash, she screamed, using her blood as ink to write a single word on a yellow banner. Break. From the direction of the ancestral temple, we heard the crash of breaking beams. The imperial ancestral tablets toppled over. The puppet army froze, and syrup poured from their eyes and mouths, forming the word eternal on the ground. Damien's bronze arm cracked. He tore open his chest and pulled out a beating heart made of candy. This seal is of the same source as you, Chloe. You can't escape. The word eternal on the candy heart was identical to the brand on Chloe's collarbone. No wonder I could never rewrite. She stammered, collapsing onto the roof. I always got stuck on the same chapters. I threw my half of the fish pendant at the candy heart. It slotted perfectly into the eternal brand. A blinding light showed a memory. Chloe passed out at a contract signing as the head of the agency branded her with a red-hot seal. From a day I signed the contract, she shielded her eyes from the light. I became the living seal. Before he dissolved into dust, Damien threw the candy heart toward the North Star. If I die, we all die. As the stars began to fall, Chloe dipped her fingers in her own blood and wrote in the air. I heard a familiar rustling sound, the same sound as the fire that had consumed her rejected manuscript 3 years ago. I dedicate this book to blood. The words final chapter soaked into the roof tiles, and the cracks in the night sky began to heal. The moment the constellations collapsed, I heard the sound of the world tearing like silk. Brace the roof, Ava yelled, her long sleeves wrapping around a gargoyle. The world is fading to white. The Crimson Palace walls were bleaching to the color of blank paper. The glazed tiles were breaking apart into individual brushstrokes. Chloe grabbed the falling half of a Chinese character, its sharp edges cutting her fingers. The correction is dismantling the foundation of language, she cried, using her blood to sketch on her sleeve. Quick, reassemble the Principles of Architecture chapter. I leaped across the disintegrating character for roof, the pendant searing my chest. Floating characters for joint and beam were being devoured by the words Aroti and decay that swarmed from cracks in the earth. Survival rate, 92%, Ava said, her needles trembling. Where's Ethan? A flash of blue light came from the northern gate. Ethan, on horseback, charged through a river of black ink. The firearms manual in his hand was now a torch, illuminating the fading eternal brand behind him. Watch out for the word bugs, Chloe yelled, pulling me away from the edge. The character's for gargoyle had morphed into a centipede-like insect, chewing on the character for support. Ethan threw the torch to me. Burn the corrupted text. The flames incinerated the word ROT, but the character for fire began to consume the palace walls. We can't fight it head-on, Ava cried. Use my hairpin, Chloe shouted, pulling a jade pin from her hair. I hid a backdoor key in the manuscript. She drew the pin through the air, and the character for fire broke apart into its component radicals. The scattered brushstrokes reformed into the character for lantern, which hung over the main hall, a temporary sun. Survival rate is dropping to 88%. Ava yelled, Ethan, what did you do? He suddenly slit his wrist, splashing his blood on the burning remains of the manual. I will be the anchor. The moment his blood hit the page, all the floating characters froze. The fish on my pendant began to swim, guiding the characters for joint and beam back into place. You'll be trapped in the anchor point forever, Chloe cried, her hairpin sparking. Better than being a puppet, he said, his black armor beginning to turn to stone. Stuff the remaining pages into the cracks. I grabbed Ava's needle pouch and began guiding the characters for the 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, earth, to plug the fissures. Chloe's hairpin was a blur, embedding the characters for virtue and justice into the main support columns. When the survival rate hit 95%, Ethan had become a stone statue. The last page of the firearms manual in his hand now read, The foundation is laid to stand for 1,000 years. 30 seconds left. Ava pointed to the west. There's a breach. As we ran toward the fissure, Chloe's hairpin snapped. She stared into the darkness. There's a second eternal seal down there. In the river of ink, we could just make out the head of the agency, holding a brush, about to press a new, bloody seal onto a fresh manuscript. I was gnawing on a flatbread on the main thoroughfare, watching a shopkeeper paint his lanterns with phosphorescent powder. New glow-in-the-dark lacquer, he yelled, holding up a lantern that emitted an eerie blue light. Brighter than daylight, come midnight. Chloe kicked a smoldering boiler. You call this cyberpunk? They're just ghost fire lanterns. Ava looked up from a bubbling pot of chili oil. Survival rate at 97%. Only 3% of the correction's influence remains. I stared at the gilded sign over our new restaurant, Thorne's Chili House. The crimson of the lettering always reminded me of the bloody mist that was once Damien. Table for two, sirs, a waiter's voice suddenly hitched. Whoa, the cauldron's come alive. The large copper pot in the center of the restaurant had grown legs, and syrupy tentacles were emerging from the bubbling chili. Ava flung a silver needle that pinned the pot to the floor. Residual correction, she sighed. Chloe ran over with her calculator. This is what you get for trying to franchise. The moment her calculator beads hit the chili, the syrup tentacles shrank into sweet rice balls. A scholar at the next table, terrified, raised his chopsticks and began composing a poem. A priceless feast upon my plate, where chili vanquishes dark fate. Purging unlocked a new menu item, Ava said, fishing out a glowing block of butter. Today's special, corrected brain stew. I touched the fish pendant at my neck, watching it glow warmly in the steam. The stone statue of Ethan still stood at the northern gate, his firearms manual now home to a sparrow's nest. They've opened a turbine-powered carriage company in the East Market, Chloe said, drawing a map with a red pen. They say it uses bellows to move faster than a royal courier. When we squeezed into the turbine carriage, we discovered it was a donkey cart with 12 leather bellows strapped to it. The moment the driver cracked his whip, the gust of air knocked every lantern on the street into a shower of blue fireballs. Survival rate, 98%. Ava's needle trembled over the map. The correction is massing on the outskirts of the city. When the cart reached the old bridge, we saw figures made of syrup digging up a grave. Chloe's hairpin began to burn. It's the first observer's burial site. A final contingency left by Lucas, I said, my hand on the pendant. He buried himself in the anchor point. The moment the syrup figures unearthed a skeleton, my pendant flew from my neck. The two halves clicked together over the skeleton's chest, forming a complete celestial map. So this was the Real control board, Ava said, using her needles to direct a splash of chili oil at the syrup figures. Chloe, write the epitaph. Chloe dipped her finger in butter and wrote furiously on the tombstone. Here lies Lucas Vance, first observer of the Travelers Alliance, and pioneer of artisanal chili oil. As the syrup exploded in a shower of greasy fireworks, the survival rate hit 99%. The skeleton of Lucas Vance slowly raised one hand. Tucked between its bony fingers was a faded invitation. A hidden level. Chloe unfolded the yellowed paper. Tomorrow at midnight, the Imperial Mausoleum. I looked toward the setting sun. The wind from a passing turbine cart was sending the blue-flamed lanterns spiraling into the sky. On the brightest one, I could just make out the faint, shimmering logo of the agency. We were sneaking into the Imperial catacombs when Chloe's torch nearly set my eyebrows on fire. This stupid invitation is definitely a trap, she muttered, shaking the moldy silk scroll. Lucas has been dead for 20 years. How is he sending mail? Ava's silver needle suddenly pointed to the southeast corner. There's something alive over there. The eternal flame in a wall sconce sputtered to life, illuminating a floor littered with bronze calculator beads. I picked one up. It was stamped with a 404 symbol, and the fish pendant on my neck grew hot. These are the first traveler's burial goods, Ava said, using her needle to clear away a cobweb. Look at the carvings on the sarcophagus. The wooden coffin was covered in scratch marks. The deepest one spelled out, "The eternal seal is a lie." The moment Chloe's hairpin touched the lid, the entire tomb began to shake. Survival rate, 99%. She said, staring at her trembling divination needle. Someone's hijacking the system. The painted figures on the wall murals turned their heads and glared at us. The lutes in their hands bled droplets of ink that spelled error. The stone statue of Ethan rose from a crack in the floor, the firearms manual in his hands crumbling to ash. Damn the agency to hell. Ethan's voice echoed from a statue. Lucas hid the true anchor point here. Chloe suddenly threw herself at the sarcophagus. I know how to end this. She dipped her fingers in the lamp oil and began writing on the silk scroll. With every stroke she made, a layer of paint peeled from the murals. Don't write the final word, I yelled, grabbing her wrist. The last time you wrote the end, you almost erased yourself from existence. This is different, she said, shaking me off and writing the word reset. The ink immediately spat back in her face. Cough. They're altering. Ava pressed a needle to her forehead. The agency put a curse on the scroll. The tomb's ceiling cracked open, and the voice of the agency's director, thick and syrupy, dripped down. Miss Vance, it's time to renew your contract. The new contract in his hand was branded with the words for eternity. Renew this. The stone statue of Ethan exploded, and his ghostly afterimage shot toward the crack in the ceiling. I've been putting up with you people for 10 lifetimes. The instant the survival rate hit 100%, Lucas's sarcophagus flew open. The pendant in his skeleton's hand flew out and merged with ours, forming a complete, glowing map. So reset wasn't an ending. Chloe whispered, dipping her fingers in her own nosebleed to write on the coffin lid. It's a new beginning. As the tomb collapsed, I saw thousands of ink characters rearranging themselves into mountains and rivers. The lanterns of the city's streets became the rising sun. Ethan's fading spirit became a willow tree by the riverbank. The river of syrup receded, becoming the city's moat. The survival rate. Ava's silver needles crumbled to dust. We don't need to count anymore. We stood outside the newly formed city walls as a merchant's cry drifted on the wind. Get her newly reset, revised edition chapbooks here. Chloe suddenly grabbed my ear. Don't you dare touch that book. The cover has our faces on it. I was sitting on the steps of the unconventional story shop, gnawing on a slice of watermelon, while Chloe chased the new apprentice down the street, whacking him with her calculator. I told you not to typeset the overbearing commander's secret love, she yelled at the poor boy. I hate angsty romance tropes. Ava leaned out of a second-story window and poured out the dregs of a chili pot. The survival rate is at 100%. What are you still worked up about? I stared into the pot at the chili peppers shaped like the eternal seal and thought of Damien exploding into a cloud of greasy smoke. Care for a story, sir? A young woman in a green dress approached, holding a wooden box of books. The latest edition of The Secret History of the Travelers' Alliance. I was about to wave her away when I noticed the intricate carving on her box was identical to the pattern on Lucas's pendant. That pattern, it's a family heirloom, she said, winking as she pulled out a bronze calculator. My grandfather's name was Lucas Vance. The watermelon slipped from my hand. Chloe's calculator beads flew through the air and expertly knocked the hairpin from the girl's hair. Is the agency sending spies now? My grandfather left me this, she said, pulling out a faded silk scroll. It was a detailed map of the agency's prison complex. Ava's silver needle suddenly pointed down the street. The turbine cart just crashed into the candy stall. When we ran over, the driver was holding up a wooden sign that read, self-driving, and trying to explain himself. The bellows went rogue. Chloe kicked the sign out of his hands. Another one of the agency's half-baked inventions? Of course not, the green-robed girl said, pulling out a bronze compass. This is called pneumatic mechanics. She twisted the compass, and all the scattered calculator beads on the ground automatically arranged themselves into the words unconventional. The pendant on my neck grew hot, resonating with the compass. Ava narrowed her eyes. What else did your grandfather teach you? He told me to find a gentleman wearing the other half of this pendant. Go look for your dad, then. Chloe snapped, shoving a copy of The Secret History into a stove. Stop trying to drag us into another mess. The girl suddenly produced a sealed letter from her sleeve. But grandfather said the outline for the sequel was here. There is no sequel, The three of us roared in unison, startling a flock of sparrows from the rafters. In the twilight, the agency's shimmering logo was faintly visible in the clouds. The old man selling candy sculptures began to hum a little tune. One player leaves the stage, another enters on cue. The thing about stories is there's never really a final page. End.